everyone, welcome to this video. So in this video, I will be providing you with a crash course on teaching geography and history in junior secondary school. So when you came into this unit, I mentioned that there is a very high chance that you would be teaching years 7 to 10 history and/or geography. And if these aren't your subject areas, you may be feeling similar to the images on your screen here. Out-of-field teaching is a real thing happening in schools now, and it happens outside of HSIE as well. But here the focus is HSIE and preparing each of you to teach the mandatory subjects, history and geography, in 7 to 10. So out-of-field teaching, what is it? This involves teachers who are assigned to teach subjects and year levels when they are not suitably qualified to do so. And what does it mean to be suitably qualified? This usually means that you have studied your subject in your undergraduate study so that you are an expert in your field. And you are prepared to teach students that subject area because you have that expertise. What are the impacts of out-of-field teaching? It disrupts the integrity of the subject. It results in heightened levels of disengagement, lower than anticipated achievement of student learning outcomes, and an increasing lack of confidence amongst teachers about their ability to teach effectively. So there are a lot of impacts when teachers are teaching out of field. So what this part of the unit is trying to do is to prepare you so that you are more aware of what you need to teach and how you can teach history and geography. Some of you will not have studied history and/or geography since you've been in high school yourself, so this crash course will really provide you with a foundation of what teaching in these two subjects is all about. So we're going to start with geography. The aims of teaching in geography is to develop the following: a sense of wonder, curiosity, and respect about places, people, cultures, and environments around the world. We also want students to develop a deep geographical knowledge of their own locality, Australia, the Asia region, and the world. We also want students to be able to think geographically, using geographical concepts. We want them to be able to have a capacity to be competent, critical, and creative users of geographical inquiry methods and skills. And finally, we want them to be informed, responsible, and active citizens who can contribute to the development of an environmentally and economically sustainable and socially just world. There's a two-strand model in geography. On the one hand, we want students to know and understand geography. We also want them to develop geographical skills as well. So, geographical knowledge and understanding. This involves developing knowledge in local, national, regional, and global contexts. Geography is divided into two branches. We have human geography and physical geography. Physical geography is where we are understanding and learning about the natural world, the environment. In human geography, we are looking at how people interact with the environment around them. So in geography, we are also asking students to look at contemporary and topical events, and this can really engage them because it's relevant to their everyday lives. Geographical inquiry and skills is the second part of the two-strand model. This involves skills where students are creating geographical questions. They are coming up with an inquiry into an issue, process, or phenomenon. We want students to develop geographical questions. What do these look like? We want them to collect, record, evaluate geographical data, make judgments about this data, and draw conclusions about what the data is trying to tell us, and communicate that to the teachers and peers, and also reflect on these conclusions. And as students proceed through geography in high school, we ask them to consider what actions can be taken to address issues. There are different units in HSIE from 7 to 10, and overall the focus is usually either physical or human geography. Now the physical and human geography interconnect across all the units, but overall these are the different sort of focus areas in each of the year levels. In Year 7, students are looking at water in the world. So we're looking at scarcity, water scarcity, uses and sustainability of water and its value. And the human geography unit is on place and livability. So looking at the focus on perception and management of places, environmental constraints, and livability, and how to define what livability is. In Year 8, students are looking at landforms and landscapes, looking on those geomorphic processes and landforms that they create and the landscape hazards. Changing nations is a great topic where we're looking at shifting distributions of populations at different scales. So that's at the local level, national, global level, and we're looking at environmental, economic, and social impacts and challenges. Year 9, students looking at biomes and food security, looking at biogeography, food and fiber production, agricultural ecosystems, and environmental constraints with food security. Geographies of interconnections is the human geography focus in Year 9, where students are looking at how places are interconnected, the influence of location and distance, inequality, transport, infrastructure, and communication. In Year 10, students are looking at environmental change and management, looking at environmental functions, threats to sustainability, and the consequences for different management choices. Then the human geography element in Year 10 is human well-being, where we are asking students to focus on variations in human well-being at different scales, across different places in different parts of the world, and an emphasis on sustainability, social justice, and citizenship. In the senior school, in years 11 and 12, students are looking at natural and ecological hazards, so focuses on risk management, preparedness, mitigation, and prevention relating to natural hazards. We're also looking at sustainable places, so looking at changes in population, urbanization, economies, livability issues, and megacities is a big one. In Year 12, we're looking at land cover transformations, so human-induced change leading to the creation of anthropogenic biomes and the impacts of this with reference to climate change. And in Year 12, we're also looking at global transformations, a focus on international integration, so thinking about globalization and the spatial outcomes of economic and cultural transformation and their geopolitical consequences. So you can see there is a wide range of topics that students look at in 7 to 10 especially. And for those of you who aren't keen on the physical geography, we'll be happy to see probably the human geography element in geography, which is great. In geography, we have 7 concepts, and these concepts spread from early stage 1 right to year 12. The one difference I would say is that change is not introduced until years 5 and 6. But the concepts are place, environment, space, sustainability, scale, interconnection, and change. These concepts underpin all of the topics in the curriculum. You will be teaching these concepts while you are teaching the units of work. If you're unsure what some of these concepts mean, a good idea is to have a look at the current syllabus, and there are definitions of each of these concepts in the syllabus. It also highlights how students can understand those concepts in the continuum of learning, so across the different stages. The centrality of scale. Scale is really important in geography. Geographers typically recognize the centrality of scale in order to explore those concepts that I just read out. So cartographic scale and phenomenon scale. These are the 2 types of scales that we look at in geography and very important in your teaching. We are looking at scale in terms of representation on maps, so proportionate representation on maps, diagrams in a statement, a ratio, or a representative fraction to sort of give us some information about the data that we're looking at. We also look at phenomenon as well, so the size at which geographical structures exist and over which geographical processes and how they operate in the world. So 2 different ways that we look at scale in geography. Geographical skills, very important in teaching, remembering that it's not just the content that we're teaching students or the topics that I read out to you, but it's also the skills that students need to be learning. So there are many skills that students develop and acquire across the geography curriculum, and these are specific geographical skills here on your screen. So graphicacy, that's the skill of producing maps, graphs, and so forth, refining techniques of representing data in different ways, map interpretation, so being able to use maps, locate features, identify and describe patterns of distribution. So there's different types of maps that you'll need to understand what they're used for and what sort of data they present. Fieldwork. So this is different from an excursion. You can go on an excursion and engage in fieldwork. That's true, but not all excursions involve fieldwork. So fieldwork is where you're actually collecting data, making observations, recording notes on the data that you're collecting. You might be conducting surveys or interviews out in the field or carrying out measurements, recording how many bottles are at the beach, plastic bottles, and so forth, things like that. Data processing, so this is transforming data and information from one form into another. So students may have counted how many bottles, plastic bottles they found on the beach, how many elastic bands they found on the beach, and they will put this tabulation into a graph. So moving one form of information and data into another form. And that's one of the skills that students are involved in. Geographical techniques. So this is directional language. So teaching students the language to use in geography, map coordinates and references, scale, compasses. As I said, fieldwork is very important in geography, and students are engaged in fieldwork right from primary school. So students who are studying geography undertake research and data collection individually and in groups as well. And it's a great opportunity for them to apply the different concepts that I mentioned before, those 7 concepts, and be engaged in inquiry pedagogy and being involved in their local community. So usually students will go out into the local community and be involved in data collection there, and that can be more relevant for them and probably more interesting as well. So there are some downsides to fieldwork, but we're going to focus on the benefits. The downsides being, I suppose, it's always a risk taking students out of the classroom, and that needs to be recognized and sort of dealt with before planning the fieldwork. And it's also can be stressful for teachers to take students outside of the classroom, but there are many benefits to it. Students can develop both personal and interpersonal skills. So their own skills for themselves when they're out in the field, but also working with groups. They're also involved in experiential learning, so being in the field and being a part of something greater than them. Developing observational skills, so learning those skills to look for something in the field and transfer that into some sort of recording or data collection. Personal responsibility for learning, so the teacher is there helping students and guiding them, but students are responsible for their own learning. Experiencing real research. So students are involved in that real research aspect, which can be quite fun and something different from being in the classroom. Developing respect for the environment. So this is where students are actually we're in the field, we're learning about the environment, and we can see impacts of different things that have happened, different developments, and so forth. So it can help students to develop that respect for the environment and developing analytical skills as well. So as many of you know, there are different types of digital technologies that we use when teaching geography. Some of these you may be familiar with, some you may not. So GIS is a computer system that analyzes and displays geographically referenced information. So we've got 2 layers of thematic layers that you can see here on your screen, and also different data that creates and produces an output so that we can analyze that data specific to some sort of phenomenon that we are researching. So there are new technologies that are coming out all the time that we use in geography. This may be an area where you need to learn a little bit more about how these work so that you can teach the use of these to your students so that you can understand a little bit more about the data that you're looking at. So there are lots of different ways that you can learn about GIS, whether that's watching YouTube and learning about how they work, and also probably professional development would be great if that's available to be a part of. So digital literacy, we know that this is a general capability in the Australian curriculum and it's applicable to all the KLAs, but there are specific technologies that can enhance the skills in geography. For example, the one I just mentioned, GIS, and also global positioning systems. So these are really important in geography, and GIS links spatial data, maps with non-spatial data, as I mentioned before, and puts those layers together to produce that output. So there are different types of multimedia and simulations, which are also excellent resources. And it's important that if you're not familiar with these types of technologies, that you take the time to become familiar with how you can use these in the classroom to understand the topic that you're looking at and where it's appropriate to use these technologies to teach a certain topic. So perspectives. Perspectives is a way of viewing the world, the people in it, their relationship with each other, and the relationship to communities and environments. Perspectives is something that we teach in history, but it's also something that we teach in geography. We want to teach our students that there are different perspectives in understanding the way the world works, the ways in which people interact with their environments, the ways in which we can understand the impacts and the degree to which something is being impacted around the world, different phenomenon. So, in geography, when we are teaching different topics and asking students to consider impacts, challenges, and so forth, we are asking them to think about the social, economic, and environmental challenges and impacts. Remember that acronym, SEE. Anytime students have to analyze a type of phenomenon, they are looking at it through the lens of the social impacts, the economic, and the environmental. So for example, in year 7, in teaching water in the world, you may be looking at water scarcity in Africa, and while students are working through their investigation, whatever the assessment might be, you will be asking them to consider C, the social, economic, and environmental challenges and impacts. Students often struggle with the social and economic part of it. Environmental, they're pretty good at, from what I could see in the classroom, but social and economic, they sometimes struggle with. Some of the exemplars that you'll see in the assignments, you'll notice that I sort of give some examples of what that might look like. You can use those as exemplars to sort of understand what we mean by social and economic challenges. So that's really what we're looking at in geography. We're looking at different scales, as I mentioned before, local, national, and global scales. And we're considering the C challenges and impacts. And we're looking at global interdependency, rapid technological advances, overpopulation, and competitive economic systems. This is all a part of what we're teaching in geography. And one of the main themes in HSIE is social justice, and that really comes through when we're looking at all the different topics, because it comes down to, is this socially just? Is this a socially just way for the world to be? And that's often a pinpointed question in our units. So meaningful geography teaching and learning goes beyond just learning about the physical geography, though. It's not just about maps, mountains, rivers, climate, agriculture, and manufacturing. Many of us learned many years ago in school, but we're looking more at connections, people, and cultures. That's why I said if you're not really keen on the physical geography, the human geography is really prominent in geography now, which is great. There is a reciprocity between people and their influence on the natural environment and the influence of the natural environment on people. So there's a back and forth motion between how we influence our environment and how it influences us. And that's really the focus in geography. So there are geographical skills that students engage in and learn that you have to teach to students in geography. You need to teach them how to observe, create questions, plan. You need to teach them how to collect data, record it, evaluate it, sort of interpret it, represent it in different ways, plan an inquiry, analyze the data, make conclusions, reflect and respond and communicate their understanding to you. So these are all the different types of skills that are a part of geography. So deep learning in geography, it can be achieved by engaging inquiry learning, which we will be looking at in this unit. And this is in order to build knowledge and also develop skills. We want students to be competent to look at current issues that are of global concern. Some examples of applying geographical concepts to inquiry in the secondary years, for example, some questions that you might ask or that might form your teaching across different units in year 7 might be, how does people's reliance on places and environments influence their perception of them? What effect does the uneven distribution of resources and services have on the lives of people? What approaches can be used to improve the availability of resources and access to services? In Year 8, we ask questions such as, how do environmental and human processes affect the characteristics of places and environments? How do the interconnections between places, people, and environments affect the lives of people? What are the consequences of changes to places and environments, and how can these changes be managed? So what do geography teachers teach? As I mentioned before, we are engaging students in a lot of different types of representations of data, understanding the data, interpreting it, and drawing conclusions about the data that they are presented. There are different types of maps and ways of presenting data that you need to become familiar with. But basically, as I mentioned, the skills involve collecting data, recording it, interpreting it, evaluating it, and sometimes representing it in different ways. So the main takeaways when understanding the teaching and learning in geography is to focus on the concepts that underpin the curriculum, knowing what those mean, defining them, and understanding where they come through in the geography curriculum. It's important to understand what the geographical skills are and how you can teach those geographical skills to students. It's also important to understand the different types of technologies that is required in the classroom to use in order to teach students different phenomenon and understand data. The main takeaways for understanding what to teach in geography is to remember those geographical concepts. There are 7 of them. You should know what they are. You should look through the curriculum and understand where these concepts are coming through in your teaching. Where in the different units of work do these concepts shine through? Where do we see interconnections? Where do we see place? It's also very important to understand what the skills are in geography, how you teach those, how you scaffold them for students so that they can understand how to use them and develop them as they proceed through school. It's also important to understand what the different topics are across the different units, what you will need to teach, what you will need to know in order to teach these topics. And it's also important to know the different geographical technologies that are out there that you'll need to use, such as those examples on your screen and the different ways of presenting data to students, either through maps and different diagrams that will help you in your teaching of geography. So that's it for this crash course in geography. Let's move on to history. Okay, moving on to the crash course in history. The elements of history. We are thinking about right now why history matters. A lot of students will be asking that question as well. And what do you need to know about teaching and learning in history? That's going to be the focus of this crash course. I'd like to read out a quote. How can historical learning enable young people to investigate the opportunities and problems of the past and the modern world, to decide what might need challenging or cherishing, and to participate in the making of a better future for themselves, their communities, and their world? I think this is a great quote because it really ties in the past, the present, and the future. History isn't just about the past. It's also about what's happening now and how we can move forward into the future. You'll hear a lot about thinking historically, or what it means to think historically. Thinking historically underpins the curriculum in history. And thinking historically involves these main 6 points. A capacity to establish causal links between events. So students being able to do that, making those connections. An ability to see events from the point of view of participants. So having empathy for others with the different points of view. An understanding of the use and reliability of different forms of evidence. Students do this in history. They look at evidence and make decisions about what the evidence is telling us and how reliable a source might be. An ability to communicate conclusions and place events in their appropriate historical context. An understanding of change over time. An ability to sift through evidence and reach conclusions, historical explanations that are thoughtfully provisional. So things change over time, understandings and perspectives. So this is what it means to think historically. these are the main points of what you are teaching in history. So take note of these points and remember those as really the driving force of the history curriculum. You'll also hear the term historical consciousness. So thinking historically and historical consciousness. We want to promote a sense of historical consciousness to students. Historical consciousness is defined as referring to an individual's awareness of the relationship between the past, present, and the future. How different people understand and interpret their place in time by connecting different historical events and trends in their current lives and the perspectives in the future. It's the ability to see how the past shapes the present and informs our understanding of the world around us. So there's that deep connection between the past, the present, and the future. So remembering that historical thinking and historical consciousness are deeply connected and very important in the teaching of history. We can promote a sense of historical consciousness through using stories throughout history, helping students to understand perspectives of the past and of people in the past as well. We talked about geographical inquiry. We also need to be thinking about historical inquiry. What does that look like? The 5 main bubbles here are what you will be teaching students in history. You will be teaching students to pose questions about the past, ask questions, be curious, create that sense of wonder. You will be asking students to analyze historical sources, not an easy thing to do, something that I really struggled with in teaching history, and it does take work. It's something that a lot of students struggle with. So weighing up evidence. So we'll provide students with different forms of evidence that may provide different points of view, different perspectives on an issue in the past, and asking students to consider, interpret the data, and come to a conclusion. Debate ideas. You might be looking at some event, maybe the impacts of the event, what the deeper impacts are of certain events, and that can be debated, and making judgments. These are the really key focus areas in historical inquiry. And if the content isn't important in history, which it is, then these historical inquiry skills are really, really important. And I've had students in the past tell me that in reflection on their time looking back at their learning in history, that it wasn't really the content of what they were learning, but it was really the skills that they developed that stuck with them. So these are transferable skills. These are skills that students can use across the curriculum, being able to analyze any type of source, be critical of it, ask questions, make judgments about that material, debate ideas, and weighing up different forms of evidence, different news stories, what we're being told, what we're being fed. All these skills are really important, and that's something that you can mention to your students, that we're not just learning about the past, but we're actually developing a lot of really important skills here. So what is historical inquiry? Well, it provides many different benefits for students. For example, in the following ways. The problematization of history, which engages students' interest and actively involves them in historical thinking. It engages students in the actual process of doing history. So we're actually interacting with primary and secondary sources. And it provides an analytical framework where teachers and learners can work together. That's why inquiry learning is great, because it's not rote learning where the students are just expected to sit there and listen, be quiet, write down what's on the board. Sometimes that's important, but historical inquiry is really the moment where teachers and students can work together to work through an inquiry question. So similar to geography, history has concepts. What are they? Perspectives, cause and effect, contestability, empathy, evidence, continuity and change, significance. And you can see some examples here in figure 10-4 that shows you some types of words that sort of relate to these different concepts. So for example, continuity and change, we're thinking about context, movement, dynamic, progression, equilibrium. Evidence, we're looking at bias, analysis, application, interpretation, evaluation. Cause and effect, we're looking at ideas, events, unforeseen circumstances, and consequences, both short-term and long-term. Perspectives and empathy, similarities, differences, beliefs, motives, points of view. We're looking at interpretations and contestability, argument, debate, disagreement, conflicting evidence, controversy, present-day perspectives, and significance, remarkable, remembered, important, groundbreaking, resonates, effect. All these words don't necessarily say history, but they're really important concepts to understand. And they are relevant to history, but they can also be very relevant to other subjects as well. And students really having an understanding of these concepts can really help them across the different KLAs. So some examples of the types of skills that students need to learn. Students need to learn chronology, terms, and concepts. And this is where students are sequencing different events in the past, and they're also learning those concepts and what they mean across different topics. Students are also looking at researching, that's a skill, being able to research parts of history, understanding what sources are relevant, how to find them, and also using digital technologies to locate these different sources. Analysis and use of sources, a difficult skill to teach, but a very essential historical skill. So this is where students are processing and synthesizing information from different sources and bringing it together to form an historical argument. Evaluating the usefulness and reliability of primary and secondary sources, very key in history. Perspectives and interpretations, this is where students are identifying and analyzing the perspectives of people from the past. And finally, explanation and communication, where students are developing a product or some type of text to sort of communicate their understanding of all these other skills as well and the topics. So the role of the teacher in developing historical inquiry, Sage on the Stage. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but that's basically very didactic delivery, very rote learning, textbook, lecture style teaching, fill me up with knowledge. Doesn't really offer students the opportunity to question. They just need to be told what they need to know, and then they just accept it. We don't really engage in that type of teaching. Sometimes there's a little bit of didactic delivery at points, but not to a great extent. Guide on the side or meddler in the middle, sort of more leaning towards this type of teaching in history. So the student-centered approach and using prior knowledge to inform new knowledge, and also the teacher sort of demonstrating, explaining, questioning, and modeling their expertise in order to help students develop their own skills, and students are very active in their own learning. So the Australian curriculum tells us what we need to teach in history, and basically history is focused on human dilemmas. So we're looking at how current dilemmas that are happening today have roots in the past. So we're making that connection between the past and the present. We're focusing on human agency. We're looking at the ways in which people have dealt with oppression and injustices in the past, and maybe how that links to the present. And we're looking at interpretations to scrutiny and skepticism, emphasizing the biased nature of historical interpretation. And we're looking at all these different connections on a local, national, and global level. Those different levels are not just scales that we look at in geography, but very much a part of history as well. Assessment in history. Like any other subject, we are engaged in formative assessment, which will also lead to a student summative assessment. Those skills, both in history and geography actually, are ones that you need to be developing across the different units that you will be assessing students on towards the end. So that might be analysis and use of sources. So for example, in the Year 7 unit, Investigating the Ancient Past, you might be teaching students about different forms of evidence that highlights how Ötzi the Iceman died, and you might be asking them to form an argument based on the evidence on how he died. And that practice throughout the unit on analyzing sources will be something that you assess towards the end of that unit. You are assessing both historical knowledge and also historical skill. So you're not just asking students to remember the dates of the different wars. You're not asking students to remember the dates in the ancient past. That might be part of some of their assessment, but it's not solely what students are being assessed on. Although there is a need to get historical facts and dates correct, students should be assessed on the higher cognitive process of understanding history. And this can be achieved through designing assessment tasks that allow students to demonstrate their knowledge of the concepts that we just mentioned, previous slide, and their ability to use the skill, so analysis and use of sources, using evidence and understanding its reliability, and also understanding the concepts and all those different skills that we went over. So students are assessed on knowledge and skills. So that's it for this crash course in history. It's now really important that you go into the syllabuses and have a look at the different topics and start thinking about the different parts of the syllabus where skills could be taught. Remember, you're integrating skills into the teaching of knowledge. Students need the skills in order to move through the curriculum. If they don't have the skills, lessons will fall short. So remembering that knowledge and skills are important in both history and geography. Understanding what those skills are and how to teach them is really important. So the main takeaways from the history crash course is really to understand the concepts in history, the historical skills, what historical thinking is, and also historical consciousness. So that's it for this crash course. I hope this has helped you. Talk to you all soon. Bye.